Welcome to this MirYam Institute podcast. I am the MirYam Institute in-house analyst, Yaakov Lappin. This is going to be a solo briefing by me. There is a lot going on in the Gaza Strip, and I think it's important for viewers and the listeners to be fully updated on the significance of some very dramatic developments that have been taking place over recent days and even recent hours. And I want to start with an IDF statement that came in just a few hours ago, in which the military basically unveiled a project that it has been working to secure together with the United States and a private American company. And this is all about basically eliminating the dependence of Gaza's civilians on the Hamas terror army and the Hamas regime, and setting up an independent mechanism for distributing aid, food. It's going to also include medicine. There's going to be obviously water, fuel that will be added to this later on. But at the end of the day, what we are talking about is Israel securing a zone in which American company has today begun distributing food packages. Almost 500,000 meals were given out under this new mechanism. There were some reports of some chaotic scenes at certain stages, but order was restored, and overall, the mechanism is only going to expand. So let's look at this IDF statement, and then this can tell us a little bit about what's going on. What the IDF is saying is that it has facilitated the construction of 4 aid distribution centers in recent weeks, and I heard earlier from an IDF official that 3 of these are going to be in southern Gaza, 1 in the center. And this is, of course, all happening under the directive of the government and the Israeli Security Cabinet. So as part of the gradual opening of these distribution centers, 2 of them are located in Tel Sultan and the Morag corridor. Both of those are locations in the Rafah area of the Gaza Strip, and they began operating today. Today is Tuesday, May 27th, and food packages to thousands of families in Gaza have begun to be distributed. Now, the reason that this is very, very significant, as I've said, and the reason why the IDF Southern Command, why COGAT, which is the coordinator of government activities in the territories, and why the United States has essentially authorized the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and an American civilian security company to begin this process is because of what I believe is a late realization that unless Israel takes control of the aid distribution process, the war goals cannot be met. Now, what does that mean specifically? Well, let's look at the 3 official war goals. They are the dismantlement of Hamas's terror army, the dismantlement of its political regime, and the return of the hostages. If we are zooming in now on dismantling Hamas both as an organized terror army and as a political regime, neither of those things can happen so long as trucks are just being sent into the Gaza Strip, as they have been for a very long time, with a break in the middle when Israel paused the humanitarian supplies. And the reason that it paused them is because Hamas has been seizing these trucks, hijacking them, together with criminal gangs. And what that allows Hamas to do is 2 things. First of all, it's been feeding and fueling its own terror operatives. So Israel has literally allowed this aid to strengthen and nourish the enemy that it's fighting. And second of all, the excess gets sold on Gaza's black market. So this enables Hamas to finance itself and create, this image of Gazans who don't have enough humanitarian supply because Hamas has stolen it. So this creates international pressure on Israel. And on top of that, if that's not enough, the fact that Hamas has been monopolizing this aid gives it political power. It has meant that Gazans continue to be dependent on it. So it has all the power. And so here we see how aid that Israel has facilitated going into Gaza has been cleverly hijacked in multiple ways by Hamas to strengthen it, keep it going, both as a government, as a regime, a brutal regime, a regime that executes anybody it suspects of collaborating with Israel, and for very minor offenses. They have no hesitation of shooting people in the streets, shooting them in the head, hanging them on certain occasions, shooting people in the legs for daring to evacuate humanitarian zones. Hamas, as long as it remains intermingled with the civilians of Gaza, it will retain its power and it will make it difficult for the IDF to target it because it uses human shields. So all of this is part of one integrated weaponization by Hamas of the human shield tactic that they've been using all over the Gaza Strip. In fact, I also spoke to an IDF, let's call him a senior commander, this morning. And he was telling me that the IDF routinely runs into booby-trapped kindergartens, booby-trapped schools, booby-trapped UN facilities, you name it, and Hamas is going to exploit it in order to continue fighting Israel and preserving its power. Those are the two goals. The civilians are tools for it to do so. And the humanitarian aid, the fact that Hamas has been hijacking this systematically, has only helped their war effort. And so, based on this pattern that has been going on since the very start of the war, the Security Cabinet has finally, in my view, because I think this should have happened a long time ago, taken the decision that Israel is going to control the distribution together with this American company and the private security firm. And what is this going to do? And there's a reason why Hamas is very concerned about this, why it's been trying to tell Gazans, don't go to this. This is an intel gathering operation. They know very well why they're trying to sabotage this. By the way, no Gazans listen to Hamas. All you need to do is look at the pictures from today from Gaza to see very large crowds lining up. And just as nobody was listening to Hamas when the IDF issued evacuation calls, similarly here, the civilians who need the food and are fed up with Hamas hijacking it are certainly not listening to Hamas. So why does this threaten Hamas? Well, if we take all of the things that I just described in terms of how it was exploiting the aid to maintain its political power, to keep human shields around it, to feed and fuel its own terrorists, well, all these things get neutralized once it loses the aid, right? So if the aid is being distributed to Gaza's civilians, actually, and not being hijacked by Hamas, first of all, that means that Hamas's terrorists are losing out and they're going to be excluded from food supplies, from water, from fuel supplies that they need to fuel their various systems, power. They use generators. They're not going to have those things. They're going to start feeling the pressure. That's one. Number two, they lose their political power because the Gazans no longer need Hamas. They don't need them for anything. And this is only going to increase the pressure on Hamas. We've seen Gazan protests. Now, I've spoken previously about this. I don't think these protests by Gazan civilians are a sign that they've become pacifists or that they had a principled objection to October 7th. Polls, in fact, show that that's not the case at all. But what they are recognizing is that Hamas has lost. Hamas is very quickly losing this war now. And the humanitarian aid redirection away from Hamas is one of the primary reasons for that. And it's also to do with, obviously, the military blows that Hamas has been absorbing. And I'll get to that in just a minute. So they lose political power over the population. The population no longer needs them for anything. And this is going to embolden Gaza civilians to continue protesting. And quite likely, in my view, some of them will take up arms against Hamas because they understand, they see that Israel is determined not to give in, not to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. And they've had enough. They've had enough of this war because they see that it's not going Hamas's way. This is a reflection of the power balance, in my view. And this is going to severely weaken Hamas, leading to its collapse as a ruling regime. This process has already begun. So those are the two damaging effects. Now, the third damaging effect, I think, is the most dramatic. And that is that as civilians start to move south towards these distribution centers, what's going to happen is that Hamas will be stripped of its human shields. And then what you'll have is entire areas of Gaza that do not have civilians in them. What will they have in them? Hamas terrorist operatives. Whether they're overground or underground, once the IDF is dealing with that kind of situation, it's going to be so much easier for it to target Hamas terrorists who are not able to hide behind the civilian human shields any longer. And their modus operandi will be stripped away from them. And that will make them much more vulnerable to the IDF's strikes. It's not that the IDF isn't striking now. Of course it is. It's making every effort to avoid harming civilians. But Now, if civilians start moving to the south, which they have begun doing, and leaving the combat zones in line with Israeli calls, Hamas is going to be much more vulnerable. So every which way you look at it, this is an extremely dramatic moment. It's long overdue. We can talk about the reasons why it hasn't happened until now. A lot of it has to do with foot dragging by the previous IDF chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, and the previous defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and unfortunately also Prime Minister Netanyahu, who did not put his foot down and insist that Israel take over the distribution process. Herzi Halevi, Yoav Gallant, and others were fearful that Israel would be dragged into an open-ended military administration in Gaza. And really, this fear, I think, was the damaging factor that prolonged so much of Hamas's staying power. Because at the end of the day, if we really want to understand what Hamas is, and I used to, with the MirYam Institute, when I gave talks at the Gaza border, at the Black Arrow spot, and I would ask people who came from all over the world, what Hamas is. And, the minute people start thinking it, they realize it's not that easy to answer because it was many things at the same time. But the one thing to understand about Hamas, as well as Hezbollah, by the way, is that these terror armies always have a civilian component to them. They cannot be powerful without that civilian component that they use. They operate from these civilian areas, using them as covers. They exploit their resources and use that as financing. They use dual use import, pretending that it's for civilians, and they turn it into military attack capabilities, whether it's tunnels, rockets that they fire from hospitals and mosques and school rooftops, anti-tank missile positioning. All of these things depend on Hamas being embedded in the civilian areas. Hezbollah operates in exactly the same way. And so if we want to severely weaken them and destroy them as a major terror army, which means, a major a force that has the ability to command and control large numbers of operatives, and as a political regime, they have got to be separated from the civilians. This is the way to do it. This is the right way to do it. Of course, there are going to be hiccups. This is the beginning. This is the first step. And my assumption is that everybody involved will draw lessons. They'll improve. This is definitely, in my view, a step in the right direction, long overdue, should have happened a long time ago. And this is the kind of determination we need in order to really, really make sure that Hamas in the near future will be degraded to the point of being basically a guerrilla a series of cells that are cut off from a central leadership and basically operating locally, very similar to the way terrorists today operate in Judea and Samaria. That, I think, is the military goal in the near-term future, is to bring that threat level down. And it's going to take several more months of combat, in my view, to achieve that. But no military effort will be complete without an accompanying civilian component. And this is what's playing out today. This is what began today. And that's why this is so very dramatic. Now, on the military front, I can tell you that lots has been going on as well. Operation Gideon's Chariots, since it was launched, we're talking about, earlier this month, May 16th officially, we're talking about 800 terrorists that were killed, almost 3,000 targets that were struck, 5 IDF divisions. That's a lot of force, are systematically and methodically maneuvering through the Gaza Strip, north, center, and south. They have to move carefully because Hamas has planted many IEDs, booby traps all over Gaza. They have video cameras in so-called civilian areas, civilian facilities, I should say, that they use to monitor IDF movements. They have lookouts. These lookouts include, by the way, old women and children and men. I'm hearing this directly from IDF sources on the ground. They use them as lookouts to detonate these booby traps against IDF forces. So the IDF has to detect these threats ahead of time, move methodically and slowly, but definitely the maneuver is underway. And Hamas, most of its leadership has already been wiped out. And now they're struggling to find new leaders. And, pressure is coming in at them from every direction. Now, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture because while Hamas is definitely, if this continues, on the back foot and on the way out as being the dominant entity of the Gaza Strip, it is still has some options at its disposal. First and foremost, it can hit the pause button pretty much at any time. And it can do that by agreeing to the Witkoff model, which calls for the release of 10 Israeli hostages in exchange for a whole host of Israeli concessions. First and foremost, pausing the war, not ending the war. That's Israel's red line. Releasing large numbers of Palestinian security prisoners. These are terrorists who have been incarcerated. Israel is willing to do that. It is not willing to withdraw from Gaza. It is not willing to commit to an end to the war. This is, of course, what Hamas wants. The whole reason that they have hostages is to survive as a terror regime and a terror army. Now, there's a very painful and bitter debate in Israel about what Israel should or shouldn't do, what it can or cannot do to secure the release of the 21 remaining living hostages. This is a painful debate in Israeli society. I'm not going to go into it now, but what I will say is that the Israeli security cabinet has drawn clear red lines. And if Hamas wants a ceasefire, it knows what it needs to agree to. So far, it has not agreed to this, but this could change. This could change at any moment because it's under such massive pressure. We really don't know, whether this happens or not. If a temporary ceasefire is reached, I would expect that to delay the current maneuver, this high intensity maneuver, by about 2 months. We would see this paused. We would see Hamas once again trying to rebuild during these 2 months and trying to create the dynamics that would extend the ceasefire. That's what they're all about. That's their survival strategy in order to rebuild their army and launch more attacks as part of their endless holy war. So I think Israel, has got a lot of calculations to make going forward. As of now, there is no ceasefire. There are talks. The U.S. is involved in this. The Egyptians are involved as mediators. Of course, the Qataris unfortunately remain key players in this as well, which I think is a major mistake. And we've talked about Qatar at length. I've spoken about it with Benjamin, and I'm happy to address it again with him. But at the end of the day, so far, nothing has stopped this operation. Israel is also under major international diplomatic pressure, primarily from European countries, but also other quarters. And everybody's telling Israel to stop the war. Now, the Israeli government is also facing domestic pressure to stop the war. Now, what I can tell you really, from a military perspective for a moment is that any idea of stopping the war, literally ending the war and withdrawing IDF forces and letting Hamas bounce back, anybody who proposes this idea is proposing a form of long-term security suicide. I really can't think of another way of putting it, because the idea of going this far, fighting this hard, calling up so many reservists, again, tens of thousands of reservists have been called up, only to allow Hamas to survive, rebuild, manipulate its way into a new reality, embolden jihadists in other arenas in Judea and Samaria, the Iranians, Hezbollah, all over the world. They will be emboldened if they see that Hamas walks away from this and remains the ruling regime in Gaza. And therefore, all of the people who are calling for an end to the war, I'm not talking about a pause, the Witkoff model. That's something that I myself would want to see. If it can secure the release of 10 hostages, then I think that that's something that Israel should do. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the end of war lobby. It really boggles the mind, frankly. And I will share that with you because, many people who I think, should know better have gotten on board this bandwagon. And it's really like, coming to the gates of Berlin in 1945, April 1945, they'll say, oh, the German cities are in ruins and the Nazis are so weak. Let's end the war. Why don't we? Let's end the war. Let's save ourselves the suffering. These kinds of enemies, whether it's the Nazis in World War II, whether it's the jihadists, the genocidal jihadists of Gaza 2025, you don't end a war when they're in a position to bounce back. you don't stop the chemotherapy, and I apologize for this analogy, but I really can't think of a more accurate one when the tumor is 90% gone, and hope for the best. And yeah, we'll know how to deal with that 10% tumor. No, no, we won't. We won't. And not only that, but to have Hamas back on the border, which is what they will demand for any full agreement. They will demand to be back on the border, positioning over the same communities that they massacred in the worst massacre since the Holocaust. To agree to that is to agree to basically make the South uninhabitable, to provide a new tailwind to jihadist forces all over the Middle East and beyond. This will also harm the security of the West. It will embolden all of the worst actors. And it's really so short-sighted, so focused on the here and now and on emotional considerations that it's really sort of just, I don't have a better way of putting it. It's just really exercising the worst strategic judgment that I can envisage. And it's very unfortunate in my mind that this is being parroted, and basically entire echo chambers are pushing forward this idea that Israel now needs to end the war, when it's actually making this degree of progress in the Gaza Strip. Now, there are all kinds of competing long-term visions about what should happen with Gaza. I'm not going to get into that right now because so much is happening in the here and now. But what I will say is something that I think should be obvious. Apparently it isn't. Any long-term vision of the Gaza Strip, for the Gaza Strip, is currently irrelevant when you have 20,000 Hamas terrorists, gunmen running around the Strip still, even if they're in hiding, if they're in their bunkers, if they're in residential buildings pretending to be civilians, if they're in their defensive tunnels. That's where many of them are. The idea that, any long-term vision of Gaza, and it doesn't matter what this vision is, Trump's plan, allowing those who want to emigrate, bringing in some sort of autonomy backed by the Gulf, whatever your preferred plan is, it's all irrelevant in this current reality. It's not going to happen as long as Hamas is on the ground. And I've had to say this recently, in studio as well. The idea that this is any long-term vision that does not include Hamas ruling Gaza could be relevant if we stop the war now and Hamas remains the dominant armed terror group, is pure fantasy. It's putting the cart before the horse. It's wishful thinking. It's self-serving. It's detached from reality. And it's exactly the kind of magical thinking that led us to October 7th to begin with. So what can I tell you, my friends? This is a difficult moment because even though Israel is making such dramatic progress towards its goals in Gaza, and even though, most of the hostages are out of the dungeons and hell of Gaza, and we still have 21 that we have got to work day and night to free, no question about it. But the lack of a serious strategic discussion that's underway, both in Israel and abroad, the lack of cost-benefit analysis about what the cost-benefit is of each move, the fact that this is not hardly available, accessible to those who need to hear it, is troubling. So from the public information domain, I think that we have a lot of problems, because it's almost impossible in this day and age to get a proper strategic cost-benefit detached discussion of the various options facing Israel in the Gaza Strip. And I would expect that if you go into a medical procedure, you would not want a very emotional doctor crying to you, and I don't use that word lightly, because I believe that many doctors have those feelings when they have to choose between difficult dilemmas. But I don't think as a patient you would want to see that. What you would want is for medical personnel to be able to give you the full picture and to consider the pros and cons, and find out the best solution in the long term. I think that's what you would expect. And we should be demanding the same from people who dominate our strategic discussions and decision-making and framing. That's what I think our expectations should be. And we're not there. We're really not there in the public domain, neither in Israel nor abroad. So this is something that has been troubling me for a while. And my humble attempt to remedy this together with my colleague and friend Benjamin Anthony. This podcast is one of the ways that we try to remedy that. So I view this space with great importance, and I would encourage you all to share this content as well, because I think it's important that we get these kinds of messages out. So look, this was the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I will mention a few other things because Gaza is front and center, but we also have the Iranian situation that's, I think, really reaching another decision point. 5 rounds of talks are behind us. Very little appears to have been achieved. The Iranians have wasted American time. They're very, very good at that. They are demanding legitimacy for their right to enrich uranium. Not going to go into all the details tonight. But at the end of the day, I think President Trump has a very important decision to make. If he allows these rounds to go on and on, he's going to be sucked into a trap. If he signs a deal that allows the Iranians to preserve their nuclear infrastructure, he's going to be sucked into a trap. If he calls off the talks, if they collapse, that would provide a moment of great clarity, which will pave the path for either a joint strike on the Iranian nuclear program or an Israeli-dominated strike. Obviously, a joint strike is what we want to see because the American capabilities are second to none in the world. Those strategic bombers, those bunker busters, those are the capabilities that are best designed to reach the underground nuclear facilities at Natanz, at Fordow, Isfahan, those underground missile bases. But if Israel has to go it alone, it'll go it alone. Although even in that scenario, I'm sure that the U.S. would help. So decision time is approaching on Iran. And we're basically out of time because the Iranians have been enriching 60% enriched uranium. That's a stone's throw from 90%. 90% is the military grade. So they could probably, within a week or two, enrich enough uranium that they would need for a first nuclear bomb. And the other steps that are needed to build a bomb, building a nuclear warhead, and possibly detonating one. There are arguments about how close they are to this. There's a secret group called the Weapons Group that's basically in charge of that phase, which is separate to the uranium enrichment. But some serious nuclear experts like David Albright think that the Iranians could be 6 months away from having a crude nuclear device. So the bottom line is that they're a threshold state. There is no time anymore to be discussing faulty diplomatic solutions. And unless by some miracle the Iranians agree to disband their nuclear sites, which I think is very, very, very unlikely because it's the only component of their strategy that remains intact. Remember, the Iranian proxy program has been mostly dismantled. Hezbollah is a shadow of its former self. This was the greatest conventional threat to Israel, military threat. Now Israel strikes in Beirut and southern Lebanon on a daily basis. 2 strikes a day in Lebanon on average since the ceasefire, more than 400. And Hezbollah is in no position to return fire. Hamas is being dismantled, as we've discussed. Yes, we have the Houthis. They absorb damage. They're a nuisance. They're not a great strategic threat, let's be honest. So what's left here is the nuclear program. This is what's left of the Iranian jihadist agenda of taking over the region, leading Israel to its collapse, creating a nuclear umbrella over the proxies. Everything, this entire strategy now depends on having a nuclear program. So they're not going to give it up. They're not going to give it up. And therefore, I think, we're in a very dramatic moment. Now, the other reason why the time is right for a strike now, and actually was months ago, is the Iranian air defenses are very weak after Israel degraded most of those air defenses in October. The Iranian regime, we said, its proxies are offline. There's very little they can do to respond. Iran itself can respond with ballistic missiles, but if the U.S. is on board, then many of those bases can be hit. And many of the other threats can be intercepted. It won't be a walk in the park, but it's inherently, I think, a manageable threat, even if some missiles will get through the air defenses and cause damage. The alternative is a nuclear Iran. I think this is where we're at, and also waiting would mean that the Iranians could dig deeper. I was actually interviewing a former CENTCOM commander, Frank McKenzie, and he published a very interesting report at JINSA, and he was basically talking about the fact that now is a prime time to force the Iranians to either choose between the survival of their regime or their nuclear program, because otherwise they might dig deeper. The nuclear sites, the missile bases, they could put them further underground, out of reach of bunker busters, perhaps. So there are many signs that point to now being the time of decision. So keep an eye on that, because this arena could become dominant in no time. We'll have to see where this goes. These are very, very dramatic moments, actually, for the two main arenas, Gaza and Iran. Very dramatic moments for both of these arenas. We are living through history. Let's also remember that Israel's strategic situation overall has significantly improved and continues to improve. And let's hope, as Benjamin likes to sign off on his podcast, let's pray for the wisdom of our decision makers and for the continued victories of our armed forces, I should say, of both countries, Israel and the United States. And I will be looking forward to speaking with you next week, hopefully with Benjamin as well at my side. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode, and I look forward to next time.